Hello, I'm James Berry, a helicopter pilot and instructor working in North London in the UK. If this is your first time watching my videos, I've been making a series on the 7 steps to become a professional helicopter pilot. And today we're looking at step 3, choosing the helicopter and by extension the school. So we're going to focus on the 3 main machines, the R22, the R44 and the G2. There are of course more and bigger machines, but it starts getting incredibly expensive, and I'm going to focus on these that are the affordable ones. Okay, right, well let's get straight to it. Let's cut to me at an undisclosed location looking at some helicopters.
Here we have the R22. As you're going to see, she's a little cramped, but I'll explain why this is my very favourite little helicopter, and also the best one if you want to instruct eventually. You will learn how to fly on a budget. It's the cheapest of the machines, and because of its twitchiness, you will generally be a very switched on pilot. The R22 also sets you up very nicely to progress onto just about any other helicopter, but the obvious next path for you would be the R44. In terms of pros and cons, on the pro side, we have a very nimble machine that is the cheapest that you can find for your generic training. It sets up very well for progression into bigger machines later on in your career, and it is the most popular instructor machine, so they are plentiful. In terms of cons, this is probably the hardest one you're going to learn to fly in. It's very twitchy, it is limited to having 2 seats, it is unforgiving and demands precision with emergencies. You'll also find that it's limited on its range due to the fuel carried and the speed flown. It's also quite weight and height limited. If you're over 6 feet tall or over 15 stone / 95 kilos, you're going to find that this one is not a suitable helicopter for you to learn to fly in. Here you can see me sitting in it, so you can get an idea for how it looks and feels. And I'm 5'8" and about 80 kilos. So next, this is the R44. As you're going to see, she's a lot roomier and more comfortable, often coming with more toys and fancier models, including such grand things as air conditioning and autopilot systems. It allows you to take more people as well, such as your family and friends, so if that's a big priority for you and you want to get experience in a machine that allows that, this is the model. It's a fantastic learning machine, far more forgiving than an R22, and an ideal helicopter if you do want that easier time training. It also sets you up very well for light charter / sightseeing tours. It does come with a larger price tag, and it has its progression onto single engine turbines like the R66 or the Bell 206 Jet Ranger. In terms of pros and cons, with pros, 4-seater, much more power with just 2 people on board. Cost sharing possibilities are possible with this helicopter post PPL. It's very widely available, about the same as the R22. It is incredibly forgiving from a training perspective. In terms of cons, the only thing I can really say about it is that it is more expensive. In terms of the 3 we're going to talk about, it's the most expensive. Here we have the Cabri G2. It sits somewhere between the R22 and the R44, and somehow also a world apart. As you can see, she is more spacious than the R22 and has a fancy glass cockpit inside electronic display. But it is still a 2-seater and it's not greatly blessed with power. It's more forgiving generally than the R22, but due to its tail rotor and array of sensors on the electronic display, it can pose some traps to newer pilots. It does set you up very well for the oil and gas, offshore flying and potential IR route, and it comes with a price tag in between the R22 and the R44. It has an absolutely fantastic rotor head, and the fuel tank is much larger and allows more endurance than most other helicopters. The progression is the Eurocopter family. You're looking at your 120, your 130, or your twins, your 145 and your 155. In terms of pros and cons for this machine, the pros are the fully articulated rotor head. For reasons you'll understand much later, this is a much better rotor head. It has a glass cockpit, and as said before, its fuel capacity can lead up to an endurance of about 5 hours, whereas most other helicopters can do 3. In terms of cons, there are traps with the complexity of the systems. The tail rotor can bite due to its non-linear tendencies. It's not as widely available as the R22 or R44. It is still a two-seater, and it is a bit limited on power.
Hello again. I hope you enjoyed looking at those helicopters, hearing about the pros and cons. It's now time to talk about the schools. So the first question you have to ask yourself is, will I move? Will I be willing to relocate? Because of course that opens up the whole load of schools in the UK that you can go to. Personally, then you can start to look at the atmosphere. If you want a really commercial pace that can take you from CPL upwards, and the place that I trained, I would heavily recommend helicopter services between Reading and Maidenhead. If you're looking more for like a warm, family-friendly environment, you can go to the school I currently work at, which is Elstree Helicopters, and that's out of Elstree, funnily enough. There aren't many schools out there that I would actively avoid, but they do exist. So we're going to have a couple of, I can't call them out here, but then we're going to have a couple of discussion points and good rules to follow for picking your school. If we're not willing to relocate, we have to start thinking locally, and I wouldn't recommend, especially if you're training intensely, more than an hour's drive away. You'll find that really cuts into your energy as you go into flying, especially in the early stages and in the later stages when you're getting ready for your test. So, rules to follow, okay? Now these are just my rules, my advice that I've learned through making mistakes in the industry, etc., etc. This is not gospel. But, number one, do not go to a sausage factory. Don't go to a school that just seems to churn out pilots left, right, and centre. You will not get a bespoke experience at this school, and that is so important with something like flight training. This is a one-to-one kind of instruction. You know, there are FI courses and the like that are run with 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 or 1 to 4, and that benefits from the classroom experience. But definitely in the PPL and the CPL, I would say that one-to-one bespoke tuition is just so important, and you won't get this if you go to a sausage factory. Flashy seminars, these sort of things, it's not a good sign. Number two, don't trust it if you cannot see the owner of the school actually down on the floor working. And most schools can't actually afford to not have someone really pulling their weight. And the people who own the schools and the chief pilots, they're not always the same thing, by the way, but they're typically incredibly experienced people with wealths of knowledge and abilities, and they can pass on so much to you. You'll get so much from a 10-15 minute conversation with them. When I think about sitting down with some of the mentors I've had, I valued every minute of that, from when I was at PPL through to completing my FI. Point three is, it's a bit of a reinforcement of the first two, but just consider going to smaller schools. That bespoke training is really brilliant, and getting FaceTime with the boss. It's also nice to support the smaller places and not bigger ones. Try to investigate at least 3 schools, as I've said before. Don't worry about doing more than one trial lesson. It widens your experience as a whole. Lastly, some parting small bits of advice. When you go to the schools, talk to the staff, talk to the students, ask them where they did their training if they've done it. Ask them what they think of the place. Ask them what they think of other places you've been to. Get a feel for the industry. It's a very small industry, so everyone does know each other. You'll find out quickly if there are things that you need to avoid. Also, let's say you've chosen the R22. Look at how many R22s the school you've chosen has. If they only have one, your training can be interrupted for operational reasons. It's not the end of the world if there is only one. They don't go down very often, but it is something to think about if you're not doing very regular lessons. It can easily develop into long periods without training, which is not good. This is a really big step. I'm sure you're going to do it, and don't worry, it's no wrong decisions here, and you can always get type ratings and that sort of thing later. Thank you so much for joining me in this video. please put any comments or questions you have down in the comments. I really like it when you guys engage with me. Please subscribe and like the video. That really helps me with the channel and helps me grow this into something that can really help more and more and more people get into this industry. And please join me for the next video, which will be step 4, the PPLH course. Thank you so much. Goodbye.